Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first US-Mexico Policy Summit at TPPF, and welcome to our first panel for the day. My name is Carine Martinez. I'm the campaign director for Secure and Sovereign Frontier, which is TPPF's initiative on border security, immigration, and US-Mexico relations. In this first panel, we are going to look at the Texas-Mexico relationship, the consequences on Texas of the state of affairs, the current state of affairs in Mexico, what Texas is doing and what Texas can do. We all know that there's a common culture and history between Mexico and Texas. And of course, that makes us especially concerned about what's going on in Mexico. Mexico is also Texas' first trade partner. In 2022, more than 500 billion of trade went across Texas-Mexico bridges, which represents 81% of trade from Mexico to the US. However, in the past few years, Texas has faced an unprecedented humanitarian and security crisis at the border with Mexico. The unhelpfulness of both the Mexican federal government and the American federal government has made it clear that Texas must step in. So today we have an incredible panel to discuss the subject, talk about the challenges and some of the responses Texas can take. First, Representative Ryan Guillen serves Texas House District 31. Representative Guillen is a sixth-generation South Texan and comes from a family of public school teachers who are veterans and cattle ranchers. At age 24, he became one of the youngest ever elected to the Texas legislature, and at age 29, he was appointed as vice chair of the House Committee on Appropriations. Since then, he has been a staunch advocate for creating jobs, cutting taxes and red tape, keeping our families and communities safe, protecting property rights, and securing our border. He has recently been appointed chair of the House Committee on Homeland Security and Public Safety, and as a member of the House Committee on State Affairs. He carried several pieces of legislation that will help protect our communities from the border crisis, including with Senator Flores, the Texas Racketeering Act, and legislation that increases penalties for the offenses of smuggling and operating a stash house. Having recently switched parties, Representative Guillen is the first Republican to win Duval and Starr counties in over 190 years, and the first to win Jim Hogg County in history, having won them in the 22 general election by an overwhelming 30 points. Chairman Guillen is known for his hard work and relentless efforts for South Texas families. Please help me welcome Chairman Guillen. Mike Bence is the special advisor on border matters to Governor Abbott. Mike has more than 30 years of experience in law enforcement, including more than 20 years in border security operations and administration at the US border, and he was an award-winning Border Patrol agent. In January 2023, he was appointed Texas Border Czar by Governor Abbott and has been overseeing border security for the great state of Texas ever since, helping protect our communities by filling the gaps the current administration in Washington has created and continues to create at our southern border. Please help me welcome Texas Border Czar Mike Bence. On my right, Glenn Hammer is the president and CEO of the Texas Association of Business. Glenn has a proven record in making meaningful and successful contributions for the business community in the public policy arena. He made it his mission to visit more local chambers of commerce than anyone else on the planet. He is also a part of the Texas Camino Real District Export Council, American Society of Mexico, and National Immigration Forum. He came to TAB after 14 years as CEO of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry, where he played a central role in major tax, education, legal, and healthcare victories. He was also at the forefront of the business community's advocacy for the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement and recognizing the global race for talent to keep our economy strong. Glenn is also a recognized champion in immigration reform. Please help me welcome Glenn Hammer. Finally, Jennifer Ivey. She's the devoted wife of farmer Kevin J. Ivey. They both own a pecan farm in El Paso County that is located less than a mile from the Trump border wall. They have grown pecan trees there for more than 20 years, and Jennifer was born and raised in El Paso and is the loving daughter of John Shuckett, and mother of 7 children, consists of 5 boys and 2 girls, all of whom she homeschools with great care and dedication. In her youth, Jennifer excelled as a scholarship collegiate volleyball athlete, showcasing her athletic prowess. Her faith as a devout Catholic is a cornerstone of her life, guiding her through her various roles and responsibilities with grace and devotion. Jennifer ran for the Texas State Board of Education District 1 and achieved 46% of the vote in a dominant Democrat area of Texas. Please welcome Jennifer. So let's get started. I wanted to start with kind of the history of the region. I've heard a lot of people who lived on the border telling me that it changed a lot in the past few decades, that it used to be that border communities were exchanging more, people were crossing back and forth, and the sister cities were much more of a cross-border community. Can you talk a little bit about how life and relations between Texan and Mexican communities were prior to, the past 2 decades? Maybe Jennifer, if you'd like to start.
Sure. In the beginning, well, I guess when I was young and it was still not legal to drink here, we would always cross. So as a high schooler, 16, 17 years old, it was perfectly normal to go to Mexico and have fun. And then as I got older in my married years, my entire wedding I planned in Mexico. Everything from my wedding dress, my bridesmaids' dresses, everything. It was just easy. You would cross back and forth and have dinner, have lunch. Usually when you went over, you would get your car washed and you'd have other things. And it was just like going over to grandma's house. It wasn't a big deal. It was wonderful and beautiful. And the people were, well, the people are still the same, but it was just a magical experience because we were like a sister city and things were very easy and understandable. It was a good, great relationship. Now, you can't go over. It's no possibility. Even trying to cross over for medical reasons, especially during COVID, that was a lot. What people did was go over to get medical treatment over there because it wasn't possible in El Paso. It's too dangerous. You can't risk it. You're basically going to take a chance of being killed or taken hostage or worse. So that doesn't exist anymore. As far as farming goes, we had plenty of employees. Everyone would come to work. It was a constant cycle of hiring, and of course, lots of people, it's hard work, so they couldn't handle it and they would leave. But now there's no one. I'm working on the farm. There's nothing else. There's no one that wants to work. Everyone that is crossing, they're not here to work. They're here for other reasons. I don't know what, but they're not here to work. Personally, I've had an illegal immigrant fall out of a tree one morning while I was outside. Didn't have my gun with me, so it was very scary. Had to just, stand there and tell him, don't come closer, stay away, stay away. And luckily, my foreman was able to come over and we called Border Patrol, but they're everywhere now, and it's not safe, and it's very scary.
Thank you. Representative Guillen.
Well, I'm from the Valley. I have lived in the Valley my entire life. I've probably lived within a mile of the Rio Grande River my entire life. Right now, I live about a half mile from the river, and my family goes back in our community many generations, 6 generations. In fact, my grandmother's great-grandfather there in our home community in Stark County ran for sheriff back in the 1880s and was elected as a Republican at the time. And so our family goes back many generations, right in the same place. In my short life, of course, our relationship with Mexico has changed tremendously, as was just mentioned. Growing up, we'd go very often. Typically on a Sunday, typical Sunday was we'd go over and have dinner, or go over and take out from our favorite taqueria on the Mexican side. But that, of course, changed around the mid to late 2000s. The last time I went to Mexico was in January of 2008, and that's when the violence started to escalate. I think it was before that in Nuevo Laredo. At the time, in the 2000s, I represented Laredo in the legislature. And I know about the mid-2000s, things escalated in Nuevo Laredo. And the last time I went to Nuevo Laredo was it was sometime in 2005. And I know that in Juarez, I think things escalated even before that, in the more early 2000s. But I think in our part of the world, things escalated about 2007, 2008. And so since 2008, I have not crossed over. It's just too much of a risk to do that. But as was mentioned, before then, it was something that you did very, very often and very easily. And, to go eat, to go shop, to go see family, to go to do just any number of things. That, of course, has changed tremendously in my community since 2008. Mexico was a place that most folks loved. I mean, truly loved to go and enjoy their family and enjoy their time there. And it's just so sad to be where we're at today. The cartels and immigration has always been there, has been there for a long time, but not to the degree that we see it today. Growing up, we had the occasional group of immigrants come through the ranch. I remember that going back, as long as I can remember. But certainly, what you see today, particularly and we saw it heavy in my neck of the woods. I don't know, about 10 years ago, up until about 5 years ago or so. But then what has happened here recently is the cartels are driving most of the immigrant crossings over a little farther north and or south. It seems like the area that we're in and the area that I represent is probably used more for drug trafficking, and the cartels have figured out that it's probably best that they move the human trafficking away from their drug trafficking areas to keep from having the Texas law enforcement bother them as much as we were bothering them over the last number of years as we've escalated our efforts on border security. And so as a result, a lot of the foot traffic has moved into all these other areas of Texas between Eagle Pass and El Paso and all that area. But we still have quite a bit down in the lower Rio Grande Valley as well. And so that's what's going on.
Thank you. Mike, can you talk a little bit about the evolution in terms of border security? Representative Guillen talked a little bit about that, but I'm sure you have a lot to tell us about that.
So I want to comment on what both of these guys said. My first 3 years in the Border Patrol, I would get off of a swing shift, change into civilian clothes, and I would cross and go to Mexico. I would go to the bars for a drink, and I would walk past the very smugglers I saw earlier that day, and they would turn and walk the other way. They didn't want any trouble. It was not unheard of for Border Patrol agents to literally go back and see the people they had just deported and hang out on the south side, and it was a game. We're going to try to get through. If you catch us, we understand we got caught. We understand we have to go back. Over the last 20 years, what you've seen is the cartels absolutely control everything in Mexico. Cartels don't just control illegal trade. They've got their hands in a lot of legal trade as well, right? And so I spent some time in the military prior to going in here, and I've been in combat. And if anybody's been in combat, a 6-minute gun battle is a long time. 6 minutes is extremely long. I've sat on the river in Starr County and listened to gun battles that last longer than 30 minutes. Sustained 30-minute gun battles. Grenades are being tossed between cartels, right? We have an island that we just recently took over, and I know we'll get to talk about that later, where when we went on and took over the island, we had to sweep it first for IEDs. There were IEDs on this U.S. soil. And so the cartel controls everything. Probably in the last 3 years, they've really gotten into the immigration smuggling. If you've got to smuggle narcotics across the border, you've got to get it to its destination. And if you get caught with narcotics, your penalties are going to be pretty substantial. If you smuggle migrants and they're paying absurd amounts of money, you can literally stand on the South Riverbank and point and say, cross right there. Well, you're in Mexico, you're smuggling, but you're not really doing anything illegal because Mexico has allowed those people to be there. So there's great reward, very little risk. They don't have to cross in the United States because the federal government is completing that smuggling chain by simply taking the migrants, processing them, and then releasing them. And so there's a push-pull factor. You know, a lot of people say, well, what is Mexico doing about it? Mexico is a good partner when they have an interest and they're receiving, you know, their share of that interest. And the example I give you is every migrant that crosses into Mexico illegally, Mexico charges them $6 for a permit. So if we know that we've had at least 10 million come through in the last 3 years, do the math, how much money and how much revenue is that created for the government? Then they spend their money as they pass through Mexico. Mexico knows that these migrants aren't coming to Mexico to stay. So by the time they reach our southern border, their northern border, they've crossed and they become our problem. So it is financially beneficial to Mexico. Mexico has recently even told the federal government, you keep asking us to stop them at our southern border, but you refuse to stop them at your border. So you're asking us to do what you're not willing to do. And Mexico has kind of thrown their hands up and said, look, we'll do this much, but this is all we're going to do. There's been things put in place, and I don't want to get ahead of you guys, but we are part of the problem. This government is part of the problem because we are creating that pull factor and allowing them to come here. And by we, I refer to the U.S. government. And without that pull factor, right, we would see numbers like we've seen before. The Remain in Mexico policy, we can call it what we want to call it. It's safe third country. It existed forever. And it says that if you pass through a safe third country, you must claim asylum there. If you didn't, you're not eligible to claim asylum here. So they're gaming the asylum system. The administration is in on it. And a lot of people will tell you that the current administration's policies are, they're not working, they're failed. I guess that depends on what angle you look at it. I believe this is exactly the intent of this current administration. And so from Texas standpoint, we've had to start stepping up and doing a lot of things, and we're going to continue doing those. I apologize for my attire. I literally just drove up from Del Rio, where I was in court until 7 o'clock last night, fighting for Texas and our rights to continue securing our border, and we're going to continue doing that. Not complaining. I really wanted to be here, but I just wanted to apologize for my attire. I just jumped out of the vehicle. But it changed when the cartels really started achieving the power they have. And, a lot of people, if you look at Afghanistan, the Taliban didn't start out as terrorists. They started out as opium smugglers, right? They were harvesting opium, and the purpose for it was they were drug smugglers, right? To create heroin. Ultimately, they infiltrated all the government. They came in control of Afghanistan, and then the Taliban kind of went from a smuggling organization of narcotics to getting involved in terrorism. And so we've got to do everything we can from our side to encourage and even pressure, whether it's financial or political pressure on Mexico, to prevent Mexico from becoming the next Afghanistan on our back door, right? If Mexico becomes a failed state, we think we got problems now. Imagine what happens if we get to that point where Mexico becomes a failed state. So.
Thank you, and yeah, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate and everything you're doing. Glenn, before we go fully into the challenges, I want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about trade and how maybe it used to be, and it has changed the past decade or so.
Well, I want to first thank TPPF and Greg for the opportunity to be here and have this important discussion. And I've already learned a lot from the panelists. And I just want Jennifer to know my family consumes a tremendous amount of Texas pecans. So appreciate what you do. And you made some really important points in terms of also the labor side. And Mr. Banks, thank you for what you're doing to keep Texas safe. And Chairman Guillen, you're a star in the legislature, so we appreciate you working hard and overtime and overtime and overtime for the people of Texas. There are obviously challenges. A number of those challenges have been articulated already today. There's also opportunities if we could meet those challenges. And the number one opportunity on the business side, as we look at it, is the ability to nearshore, to reshore to North America. I doubt there are many people here who would rather see things manufactured in China, which is controlled by the communist Chinese government, than in North America. And for North America to maximize its potential, we need a strong Canada, and we need a strong Mexico. We obviously, I'm making the assumption we're going to have a strong United States because of the power of Texas and states that have good policies. But we need all three countries working well together. I'm a big sports guy. It's hard to win a championship if you just have one star. You need at least one star and a couple of people on the team that are darn close to stars. And you know, it's sort of my guide on what's the possibility, and I would recommend everyone read this book, The Globalization Myth by Shannon O'Neill. She talks about how if we get our trade policies right, the United States could be the economic juggernaut, continue to be the economic juggernaut of the entire world. You know, it's interesting. There are incredible challenges, and you know, I think any policy that we can have that reduces the power and influence of the drug cartels is a good one. I think any policies that we have on the state or federal level that reduces illegal migration, reduces the amount of fentanyl that's killing 70,000 Americans each year, that's a good one. And Mr. Banks mentioned the pull factors. Well, you take a look at what's going on in terms of federal policy. What's one of the biggest pull factors? It's how our asylum system is being gamed. It's the credible fear standard, and it's the ability to come into the United States and to remain, even if it's on a quote unquote temporary basis. It's really not temporary. And the cartels certainly know that. The other area, and I'm going to get to, is sort of, you know, I wanted to put a thought out there right off the jump. You know, the humanitarian parole standards have, I don't know what other word to use, have been abused by the administration. They should not, you know, case by case is one thing. Entire classes of hundreds of thousands of people without congressional involvement is another. I'm a sports guy. I would trade tightening asylum and tightening parole for some sort of legalization. I didn't say citizenship, that could come later. For the DACA population, I would trade that for some better ag worker programs. So, you know, I love being here at TPPF because there's a lot of, there's a lot of firepower when it comes to the power structure, and not just in the state, but nationally. And my final point is this. I really think Ambassador Lighthizer, when you take a look at what he did with the USMCA, he got it. He helped rebuild, with the Trump administration, the bipartisan coalition for trade. USMCA also includes migration provisions. It's called the NAFTA visas. There's 63 classifications of those. There are a lot of NAFTA visa people in Texas. Why don't you hear about it? Because it actually works. It's not abused. And the entire congressional delegation of Texas and in Arizona voted for that. And there's a lot of ideological diversity within that delegation. So I think we need to have that same level of seriousness, in my opinion, when it comes to some of the immigration issues, because it certainly is connected with trade, and it's got to be Texas leading the way.
Thank you. And yeah, we know that the cartels understand what's going on here, and they're fully taking advantage of that. So to go back to the challenges and the cartels, Mike, could you tell us a little bit? You mentioned Fronton Island, what you and Operation Lone Star did with that piece of land that was, in my understanding, is like kind of a shelter for cartels to operate?
So Fronton Island, and I know the representative is very familiar with it, but Fronton Island is about 170 acres. This area sits across from Miguel Alemán, and what you've got is an area where the two cartels are fighting. You got CDG and CJN, and they're fighting over that area. So there's a fight there every night, right? I can show you drone video. You can go on TPS's or DPS's website, an 8-minute video of a 8-minute sustained gunfight with grenades being thrown. It's all in thermal, so you can actually see them pulling the pins, throwing the grenades. This is going on 60 yards away from us on the south side of the river. It was going on that island. And so what you would have was when Mexican authorities would come in to try to make arrests during these gunfights, these cartel members would move to the island. And then Border Patrol wouldn't go to the island, because if they did, they would run back south. And so they were using it as their launching point for, one, getting their drugs closer so that when BP wasn't around, they could move the drugs further north. And they would also use it as their hideout to get away from the south side. So it was really a no man's land. It was a no-go zone. And so it was brought to our attention that it was a no-go zone, and we're not going to have a no-go zone in the state of Texas, especially a no-go zone that's been relinquished to the cartel. So first thing we did was we went into Fronton Island and we cleared it. We took in Texas Rangers, we took in SWAT with DPS, and we cleared the island. And once we cleared it, we maintained a visual of the island through different drone systems. And then we cleared this island. We flattened it. Every piece of brush is off that island. Now, just so you know, everything on there was considered an invasive species. But we got rid of all the salt cedar. We got rid of the Carrizo cane. And now we've wired that island up, and we've retaken control of that island. We keep LPOPs, which are listening post, operation post, on that island 24/7. We have had rounds come north. Fortunately for us, the rounds that have come north have been crossfire between shootouts with the Mexican federal officers and the cartel members. But this was an island where we had just, whether it be the feds or the state, had just succeeded that island and said, we're not going to go there, it's not safe. And so one of the first things we did when we came on was like, there's not going to be a no-go zone where cartels are just going to take over. So we went in, much like we did on the island in Eagle Pass. We took it back over, we cleared it, it's now safe. We talked to members of that community that said that they go out of their door, into their garage, into their car, and leave. They don't go out and sit in their yard. We're starting to see them actually sitting in their yards now. These are people that have been there for generations that were scared to even sit in the backyard and have a barbecue because of the fighting, knowing that they weren't being a target, but bullets, they don't, they go where they go, right? And so it's been a huge success for us. Is there still fighting on the south side? Not every night, but every other night. I'm not waving a victory flag on what's happening on the south side, but I think it's a victory for Texas that we've taken that back. We've made it safe. If now someone can actually go in their backyard, that's a huge win for us. And so we're going to continue doing that. Anywhere where the cartel thinks they're going to take a stronghold in Texas, that will be our number one focus, and we'll go there and regain control of that. We're just not going to succeed to the cartel.
Another instance where Texas steps in, where the federal government is failing and really playing the role of a shield for both Texas and America in the end.
And so correct. And so we you know, there are things, I want to be very clear, there are things at the tactical level in the field where Border Patrol and Texas, we work absolutely well together. We go out there, we do a lot together. One thing I will tell you about the Border Patrol is, you know, I bleed green. You know, you hear the blue line, that's the green line. I spent 23 years in the Border Patrol. My wife is still in the Border Patrol, proudly. She's in intelligence. Well, she used to be in intelligence. We got married, and they told her she couldn't be in intelligence anymore. I think they figured she wasn't too intelligent if she married me, I guess. But no, you know, all kidding aside, I talk to the Border Patrol agents daily, and one thing they asked me more than anything, I had some text me, hey, saw you in court yesterday. How does it feel to have to go to work for the state in order to do what the Border Patrol is supposed to be doing? These agents want to be out there. They want to be fighting. They didn't sign up to deal with what they're dealing with. So if you can imagine going to the Austin Police Department, well, actually, you probably can't imagine that one. Somebody's a different location. You can imagine going to a particular police department and handcuffing every officer to the bumper of his vehicle and saying, you will not go out and do your job, right? And then the administration acts surprised when the traffic's coming in. You know, and so I want to be careful in how I word this, but the Border Patrol they've had their hands tied in a lot of ways where they're not being allowed to enforce. We were just in court last night having to argue the right to keep people from entering the country illegally and having to fight against the federal government who's arguing, cut the wire and let them in. Explain that to me. I felt it was a very good day in court. So, and you know, I've been in court a lot in my life, and I'm not afraid of that fight. But there's not a day go by. I can tell you that I've had disagreements with upper management and Border Patrol on the river, and while it's happening, have agents walk by, give me a fist bump, and say, "Good," because we're not going to do that. To the point where management has to order other management to do things because the union and the Border Patrol agents won't support it because it goes against, you know, an oath they took. And so they're fighting a tough fight. They're in a very bad way. And so for my Border Patrol agents, if you see them, give them some kudos because they are being beat up. And please, you know, don't take out your anger on the federal government on them. Direct it toward the administration because that's where the problem is. They have laid out a welcome mat. They are teaching them how to game the system. And so, yes, but it's a no-go zone for the Border Patrol. There are areas we work together. There's areas where we can't work together because of policy. What we typically do is find the areas where we can work together. We double up. We get things done. Where we can't, we find ways to deal with that technically in the field and keep the politicians out of it.
Thank you. I'd like to go a little bit more in the details of what Texas is doing and can continue to do. You've mentioned what, of course, you have been doing with the example of Fronton Island. Representative Guillen, I'd love to hear about the pieces of legislation you carried during the 88th regular session and subsequent special sessions, what the legislature has done, and what you think we can all continue to work on.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, we've carried a great number of different bills that have done a number of different things, but we got a few things passed that we're very proud of. We passed bills to increase penalties and go after smugglers and human traffickers and those who run stash houses and fentanyl dealers, and we also passed one to go after cartels, designating cartels as terrorist organizations. We passed a RICO statute, a state RICO statute, so that we can try to hit these smugglers and traffickers and cartels where it hurts financially. We've got a lot of other ideas that we've laid on the table that we're working on, and of course we've expanded tremendously how much we're spending. We've ensured that we've putting more boots on the ground constantly. We've made sure that our DPS or military forces have the resources to do some of the things that a lot of the things that they're doing, or all of the things that they're doing, including putting concertina wire along the banks, including putting buoys in the river, including putting storage containers in some of these areas, putting fencing, putting wall, and so I think from the perspective of the state of Texas and the Texas legislature, we're putting our money where our mouth is. We're trying to fill those gaps that the federal government has refused to fill, and I think we're doing a pretty good job of it. We're apprehending millions of people each year, or at least over 1 million people each year. Which in essence means that we're helping make sure that we know who's coming in, and every day we're trying to do better with that, to make sure that every person that comes in we know about, and that's our mission. We want to keep these folks from crossing between the ports of entry, where we don't have anybody checking who they are. We want to keep them from doing that, and we want to send them to the ports of entry so that they check in. That's our bottom line goal. That's our way of trying to secure the state and make sure that we enforce our public safety, and that we prioritize our public safety here in Texas. Plenty of work still to be done, obviously. This is a very, very challenging topic, and until the federal government gives us a hand, I'm not sure if we're ever going to get our arms around it, but it's certainly something that we are compelled to have to get into and to do our best to try to address on behalf of the people of Texas.
Thank you. So I want to go back to trade a little bit. At TPPF, we think that at this point, the Mexican federal government and the current president in place has shown no will to help us on the security side, and that at some point they have to feel that they have to do their part. We understand the importance of trade between Texas and the US and Mexico, but we think at some point we should link trade to security. So one small example of that was done in terms of what we call para-diplomacy, where when the Governor Abbott increased commercial inspection and then sign agreements with the border states saying that they would help us limit the number of drugs entering and illegal immigrants in exchange of what the governor would decrease those added commercial inspection. This is one way to cooperate, at least with the Mexican states. How do you see that situation where we involve trade to help us secure our border?
I believe the Governor Abbott working with the 4 border governors was very helpful on a few fronts, both on security and in terms of trade. Because we have to remember that just like the United States, we have a federal government and states, so does Mexico. Now, you could argue that the Mexican federal government is more powerful than the US federal government, but the states do have, in Mexico, do have a certain level of authority and power when it comes to both trade and security. And another point to make is a lot of times the governors of the Mexican states have a different philosophical bent than the federal government. I don't think many people would say, Governor Abbott and President Biden, they're both American elected officials. They've got to be on the same page as everything on every issue. There is a similar dynamic in my opinion, that exists in certain states in Mexico. You take a look at some of the agreements. You take a look at, for example, Nuevo Leon and what's going on in Monterey. There's been a different level of challenge there than, say, in some of the other states. I look at the governor-elect in Coahuila, is known as Manolo. He loves going around saying that he's going to make Coahuila the Texas of Mexico. He cares about the security element. He understands the importance of it. I think that in one of the major elections, they had a candidate 3 or 4 years ago shot dead in broad daylight. They understand the importance of security, and they want to do more in trade. There's just as is in the case in the United States, there's a federal election coming up very soon in Mexico. So there will be a new leader. It may very likely be the same party. We'll see. It's difficult to predict. I actually have a better track record of predicting elections in Mexico than the United States these days. But there may be an opportunity there. What we want to do is we want to make sure that policies are geared towards increasing lawful commerce and decreasing illegal migration and illegal goods like fentanyl and other drugs coming into the state. And the private sector in Mexico wants to help here. We have signed 7 MOUs with the leading Mexican business groups, including CCA, which is sort of like the U.S. Chamber, Business Roundtable, and NAM. They're the big umbrella group. They want to see lawful commerce. So what I would say is we need to work on the private sector side with law enforcement on the state level and on the federal level for what are those programs where we can help. Like, for example, the CPAT program, the FAST program. There's different things that exist on the federal side in the United States and even on Mexico that might be helpful, because I think we all share the same goals. We want to see legal commerce, and we want to see an end, or certainly a dramatic reduction in the drug trade and in illegal migration. One other quick point that I think is important here, in terms of the migration has changed. This is no longer single guys from Mexico coming in, which was the case for a number of years. This is a worldwide issue. I would ask, and this is a good one for TAB and TPPF to dig into. I'd ask, what is Nicaragua doing? What is Panama doing? What is Colombia doing? What is Venezuela doing? What's Cuba doing? What's Brazil doing? And why, you can't blame the government of Mexico for the fact now that thousands, I'm not saying that they couldn't do more to stop, but that thousands of Chinese migrants, Indian migrants, are making their way through the Darien Gap to come here. Why is that the case? So, I think we have to continue to put positive pressure on Mexico to do as much as possible on fentanyl in particular, and to slow the migration from their southern border to our northern border. And I think what Governor Abbott has done to sign 4 agreements with the 4 neighboring Mexican states we look at that as a positive.
I want to touch on that, but before I do, I did want to thank Chairman Guillen, because a lot of what they've been doing and a lot of what they've been legislating is giving us more power in the state of Texas to offer up more consequences. And we all know that you have a system of laws, has to have consequences with those laws. And so I just wanted to thank you for that, because you make my job easier. I don't know about easier, but more interesting. How about that? But thank you very much. And then I wanted to touch on the trade. Listen, we need trade with Mexico. It is a huge trade partner. We've got way too many companies down there that we can't be involved in trade. But as I said earlier, Mexico is not going to do something unless it's in the best interest of Mexico. And I'll give you a perfect example. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, Mexico's thinking about Mexico. The Bridge of the Americas in El Paso was shut down for about 3 weeks during the start of this major surge that happened in September. After 3 weeks of it being shut down, okay, now 3 weeks of it shut down, that's a commercial bridge, because every one of those customs officers were pulled out of that POE to go to the Border Patrol to process these massive amount of migrants because there was not enough Border Patrol agents to do it. That massively impacts Mexico and the United States in trade dollars. The way it came back open was the Border Patrol's response to Mexico was, we're not closing the bridge to punish you, we're closing the bridge because we have to have this manpower in order to handle these mass migrants. And so Mexico's next question was, what's the magic number? How many migrants a day crossing before, what's the magic number? Is it 1,500 a day? You can't handle 2,000. Can you handle 1,000? At what point can CBP send those officers back to that bridge to open it up, right? And they came to the agreement that it was 1,000. And so if we can handle 1,000 a day, we can get our bridges back open. So miraculously, 2,700 migrants crossing a day turned into 1,000 overnight. Of course, the state of Texas says, well, that's not good enough for us. We're not going to accept that. There is no magic number. The number is you should be doing everything in your power to prevent them from getting to the border and crossing, and we should be doing everything in our power. And so there were some still ongoing inspections. But to be very clear, inspections on commercial traffic by the state of Texas are to ensure the vehicles are safely operating on the roadways in Texas. So that is an example of the federal government working with them. But to set a number, a magic number, is unacceptable when your mission should be to deter anyone from coming to the country illegally. And then the last thing I want to point out before we move on is most people aren't aware of this, but if I cross the border and I come from a country that does not share my information with the United States, and I tell you my name is Mike Banks, I am now Mike Banks to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection for the rest of my life. I will be processed as Mike Banks. I will be released into the country because, well, you don't have a record of what I did in Nicaragua. If I'm arrested later in the United States for an offense, deported and returned to Nicaragua, I cross into the United States illegally again with now my birth certificate. That is now my alias for the rest of my life because the Border Patrol will only accept what was in the system. My point behind that is, with these releases, we don't know who the federal government is releasing because the federal government doesn't know who they're releasing. And so don't be surprised when you hear a news story that pops up and goes, hey, ISIS is involved in smuggling, and they have a smuggling network through Mexico, and they released 250 Uzbekis, and we have no idea where they're at or who they really are. And so border security is national security, right? And if you have to leverage trade in order to get that nation to do it, then so be it. You leverage anything you have to leverage to protect Texas and to protect the rest of the United States.
Thank you. We're getting closer to the end of our time, and I want to make sure that we're keeping some time for Q&A. So last question from me. I would like for you, Mike, to tell us a little bit more about Operation Lone Star and what Texas has been doing. You've been telling us a lot already, but one question that has been continually asked is whether Texas has the authority to do what it's doing. And I would love for the two of you to try and answer that question.
So absolutely, I believe we have the authority to do it because one thing I'm not going to do is violate the law. I will secure the border any way I can within the law. So we do. We're doing phenomenal. I can tell you that the last number I gave, over 480,000 referrals to U.S. Border Patrol. What that means is that's 480,000 people that got past the Border Patrol and would have been free to roam about the country. We would have added those to the 1.9 million known gotaways that even the former chief of the Border Patrol said conservatively he thinks you could add another 20% to that. I would say conservatively you could add more. And then if you're not familiar with what known gotaways are, those are people that have crossed the border that we know have crossed the border. We've either seen them, we've got them on video or camera, and they avoided detection or apprehension, and they've never been apprehended. We don't know where they're there. I ask you this question. If you can cross the border, turn yourself into Border Patrol, and be released within hours, why would you not surrender? then you're not surrendering because you have something in your record, something in your background that prevents you from being amenable to release. Those are the targets that we want to apprehend. Those are the ones that we want. And so Operation Lone Star, it started to fill those gaps that was created by the administration because so many agents, law enforcement agents, weren't doing law enforcement, they were inside processing. Unfortunately, those gaps continue to grow because the administration keeps doubling down. We have sued over parole. We won the lawsuit. Actually, we sued over something they called NTR, which I can tell you was made up. I could pull 6 items off my refrigerator that my daughter drew and stick them in a folder, and they would have more legal standing than what the NTR was. We sued over that. We won. They were forbidden from doing that. They added 2 more forms to the NTR and called it something new. It was Pro Rapid Release or something like that. Sued over that. We were able to win that. They added a few more forms, and now they call it something else. And so, if not for Texas, who, and if not now, when, the amount of fentanyl, enough fentanyl we used to send enough fentanyl to kill every man, woman, and child in America. It's multiple times over now. It is absurd, the amount. You hear weapons don't come north. It's not true. We see lots of weapons coming north. And so, we're filling those gaps. Obviously, there's question of whether we can put C-wire in it. That's where I came from last night. We have, there's questions about whether we have the authority to do so, and that's in front of the courts right now. And the court's all fit to give us a temporary restraining order against the federal government from damaging that. And so I believe that we're on good legal standing. And absent losing in court, we're going to, again, continue to do everything we can to secure Texas and the rest of the United States.
Thank you.
So I agree. I believe we absolutely do have the authority to do it. Of course, we're hoping in a couple of these cases that that the courts affirm that. I know Mike was at one of those hearings last night or yesterday afternoon. But everything we're doing, I believe we absolutely have the authority to do. One of the best things that I think that one of the best tactics I think we've come up with, and I know Mike had a lot to do with this, is the buoys. And the buoys represent, in my opinion, the first tactic that we have done as a state to make sure that we deter them from coming in, from ever coming in. All of the other tactics deal with them after they have already come in. And so we're hoping that the courts will affirm that, and I think we're prepared as a state to deploy way more buoys as soon as we can get this affirmed in the court system. But again, it's something that we're compelled to do because the federal government is not helping us do it. And I think that the court system will take our side, and in some of these cases where it's being challenged in court, but hopefully at some point the federal government will step in and do it for us. But in the meantime, we'll do it.
I want to add one thing real quick. We talked about the drugs and the weapons. One thing that I considered a huge success, and I think is very important to notice. So Texas is 1,254 miles of the U.S.-Mexico border, right, the land border. That equates for actually 62% of the total land border from Arizona, from California. So I did a 7-day average because I had to have this number for court yesterday. 7-day average, look at the last 7 days in the state of Texas. 39% or 36% of all of the entries came in Texas, and that's 62% of the border. Arizona, Tucson sector alone, every other day is seeing more entries than the entire state of Texas. 38% of the border. And why is that? And I'm going to stand here and tell you that I firmly believe it's because of the efforts of Lone Star. It's the efforts of the legislators giving us additional powers to offer consequences. And one thing I learned from day one, and I won't go into the story, I'll share it with you on the side if you want to hear it, but I've always learned that illegal migration is always going to follow the path of least resistance. And so I said on day one when I came on, I wanted to make Texas the least desirable place for illegal immigration to take place. And I believe that we are moving in that direction. I believe with every new bill we get from legislation that we can offer more consequences, with every new mile of wire we put down, every time we stand up against the federal government, we're making the Texas less desirable. And I think you can look at that stat. I cannot remember in my career when Texas didn't lead in illegal immigration simply because it's the closest path to South and Central America. And so 39% of all the apprehensions over a 7-day period, while we own 62% of the border, we're moving in the right direction. Lone Star's working, the legislation's working.
Thank you. And if I may add, before we go to Q&A, a core role of the government is to protect its citizens. The federal government is failing phenomenally, and Texas is doing just the right thing. So thank you. We're going to go to Q&A.
Good morning. Terrific discussion. I want to focus on the linking of security with trade. And I think the question to the gentleman from the business community is that the American business community doesn't realize that you cannot separate legal trade from the criminality in Mexico. The extortion that the underworld in Mexico engages in includes legal trade and all of the freight forwarding, warehousing, and everything else that is involved in moving trade and investment across the border, including American investment in Mexico. We talk here in this discussion about migrant smuggling, narcotics, et cetera. Mexicans will tell us all about the extortion in Mexico. So how does the American community, the business community, propose to continue to trade with Mexico when we should realize that that trade is in fact increasing the criminality and the lack of rule of law in Mexico?
I completely disagree. We have $285 billion of trade between Mexico and Texas directly. 500,000 Texans, their jobs, their employment is connected to legal, lawful commerce with Mexico. And by the way, as these security efforts have ramped up, and Mr. Banks, I've learned a tremendous amount from you, and the job you're doing is good. I mean, the more security we have, the more trade we're going to have. Trade between Mexico and Texas, even with all these other issues that are very challenging going on, increased $50 billion in the past year. There are very strong laws when it comes to money laundering and other types of things. When we're talking about trade, what are we talking about? We build cars together. Take a look at the Tesla plant here. I think that's a pretty good thing. They're building a gigafactory in Monterey. Take a look at a lot of what's going on in terms of consumer electronics. It's the supply chains in Mexico that make us regionally much more competitive than we would be. We need to continue to work to secure the border. I think the federal government should give Texas a nice big check with lots of zeros on it for all the work that the legislature, the governor, and Mr. Banks and others have done. But we absolutely have to continue to go down the path of legal trade. If we didn't have that type of trade, it would harm our economy. 5% of the $2.3 trillion Texas economy is tied to trade with Mexico. It's a greater percentage than any other state. So we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and we're going to continue to work to advance and support security measures while we support increasing legal trade. And final point, Texas is the largest export state in the country. We love bragging about that. 21 straight years, more exports than any other state. We export more than New York, California, and Louisiana combined. So we need to absolutely continue that. And I don't know if your delicious pecans go to Mexico and other countries or not. I know we eat a lot of them, but we have a lot of Texas companies that want to continue to do business, and we have a lot of great Mexican-based companies like Bimbo, like Cemex. the list would go on, that have strong operations, legal operations in the state of Texas, and are investing billions of dollars to keep Texas as the top state in the country.
Just to jump in, yes, pecan industry actually is booming right now in El Paso. It's become the beehive of the pecan export. All of the guys out of Georgia are now moving to El Paso, building warehouses and storing pecans and moving them straight through Mexico. So through all of this craziness, yes, commerce is growing, especially in my industry.
Hi, my name is Christina, and I'm from Convention of States. I hear a lot of talk about the gangs and the cartels. However, my focus is with higher education. In 2021, the Department of Education statistics for Texas college enrollment says that Hispanic or Latino students have surpassed white enrollment in colleges. And a lot of our professors, including Texas colleges and universities, are radicalizing our students, and Hispanic and Latino students are prime targets for this type of radicalization with Mexican education curriculums and other liberal arts, and now we're starting to see it in political curriculums across Texas colleges and universities. Are there any plans to also deal with this radicalization of emerging DACA students within Texas colleges and universities?
Well, we did pass a couple bills this session to reform DEI in colleges and to also reform tenure of college professors in colleges. So the legislature has begun to take that up, and by passing these bills has recognized that there is a problem, and taken some steps to address it. And I'm sure that as we move forward, we'll continue to monitor the situation and see if what else needs to be done.
I would like to add to that. As running for Texas State Board of Education, right now there's 15 seats, and usually the vote comes down to 8-7. 7 are the liberal. I think that's where we come in. We need to run for state board. We need to run for our local school boards. We need to get involved, because even though there is some legislation, the teachers themselves are teaching liberally, and they're indoctrinating our kids. And that's why I homeschooled, and that's why homeschool is booming here. I think there was a 700% increase during COVID. And of that 700%, only like 32% went back. So we really, in Texas, need to take that step here in this room to get people involved in the education of our younger generation and stop them from indoctrinating them. I think that's the only step where we can start at that level, because the public school kids are already completely zombified, that's what I call it, because they cannot think outside the box. So when my children transition into public school, the teachers are like, wow, it's so amazing. They think outside and they have all these other perspectives. Well, that's because of that education they received at a younger age.
I just want to expand on something that Mr. Banks said about Arizona. The things that Texas has going on is because you guys are spending $9 billion a year on the border. Arizona is not spending nearly a fraction of that. Arizona doesn't only lead in bodies coming across, they also lead in fentanyl coming across the United States. It's the gateway to the United States. There's so many things that play a part in the difference between Texas and Arizona. Is we don't have the violence you guys have either on the border in Texas, because one cartel controls that border. You don't have multiple factions fighting for different plazas. It's just one cartel that controls it. But that can change, because once Texas puts a control on the Texas border, that's going to move slowly west. And Jason Jones and I have both predicted it in the last year. and we're seeing that shift and that tripwire now.
You're absolutely right. And so the less Arizona does and the more we do, the bigger problem you're going to have over there. I came here from Arizona. I was in Ajo, right? And Ajo, Arizona was 99% narcotic. You didn't see human trafficking out there because of where it's at. You would get off work on a Friday, call a group of Godaway, a group of Packers. You come back on Monday morning, get right back on that group because they were 8 to 15 days of hiking. And now you've got family units going out there, right? Because the cartel has really gotten into the human smuggling business because of it. And you're absolutely right. And so what we hope is when Arizona, California, New Mexico are having to deal with the numbers that Texas has, hopefully the people in Arizona are going to start rising up against, to their demanding there, if you will. I mean, Arizona up until the last election, they were out there putting out, Connex boxes. They were doing some of the very same things we were doing, and so. But you're right. One state's success is going to be another state's downfall. But I think at some point Arizonans are going to open their eyes, and more of them. Not that there aren't ones that are there, but it's going to force other states to come to the table and do something. And so if that's what we got to do to get the border under control, we can't wait around the federal government. I mean, I'm not going to wait and hope, that usually doesn't work out very well. So, but sorry, not sorry, but you're absolutely right. And so, but that's my intent. My intent is to continue making it less desirable, and if they go to the other desirable locations, I'd love for none to come in. I mean, 30 plus years in uniform of one form or another for the United States government. Right now I got to focus on Texas and do everything I can for Texas.
Yeah, I want to follow up by saying, from the legislature's perspective, I'm glad to hear that, and I think that it points to our success and the fact that we're having an impact, and hopefully the rest of the states on the Texas-Mexico border would follow suit.
I think we are out of time, unfortunately. I would like just very briefly to give the opportunity to each of our panelists to close. We have a tradition at TPPF. We'd like to close on an optimistic note. So could you each tell me briefly why you remain optimistic for the future for Texas?
I think I remain optimistic because of the Mexican people, and of course that's my heritage. There's still very good people out there, and they want an end to this too. And I think if we just stand up, I would actually pose a question: is do we have the legal authority to just shut the border down and just leave it open for commerce? That's it, just no more. I wish that would be an option for Texas. I don't know if it's legal, but I think we should think about it and just push everything to Arizona and New Mexico and take care of ourselves, because that's the only hope we have to sustain any kind of real safety here. Thank you.
I'm optimistic because it's definitely possible to increase border security dramatically while increasing legal trade, and appreciate TPPF putting together this important forum this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm optimistic because I think that the state of Texas is booming. We continue to boom. Our trade with Mexico continues to skyrocket and increase despite the challenges that we have. But our economy is growing. Texas is doing well. And I think any forecast that you see continues to say that we're going to continue to do well. Just recently, the comptroller announced that he expects another $18 billion surplus in the current biennium that we're in, another indicator that we're doing something right. And I look forward to continue to work with TPPF and Texas Association of Business and our law enforcement community to continue to make sure that Texas continues to grow, continues to prosper, and continues to be a great place to live, work, and raise a family.
Thank you.
So I'm optimistic because of a couple of things. One, we have a governor that listens. You know, oftentimes we talk about the borders like, that's what I hired you for. What do we need to do, right? And then we've got legislators that aren't afraid to step up and make some tough decisions and pass some laws, understanding that sometimes those laws are going to be challenged. So be it. That's the environment we live in, right? You've got to be willing to put it out there. And so, and I'm optimistic also because over the last year, as I've seen Texas start gaining ground on the illegal immigration, on the fentanyl, on the trafficking, we start getting a lot of the naysayers that said Texas can't do it, Texas can't do it, and they start seeing these successes, and they come back, and now they're starting to get on board and saying, okay, maybe this does work, maybe you can do this. And I will challenge, or not challenge, I'll answer your question. That's what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing. We're doing it 1 mile at a time. You know, it takes time and effort. And the other thing that I think makes me really optimistic is we've had 24 governors outside of the state of Texas agree to support Texas in our mission. 14 of those governors have already sent soldiers and law enforcement from state, and they've done so at a cost to their state because they understand what's coming through Texas is affecting their states, and they've committed to continue doing that. The last time they asked how long, and I said, well, until we stop violating laws with policies. When the federal government gets back to the table and does their job, we're going to be in this fight, and we're prepared to be in for the long haul. And so they've literally broken it down on how they're going to give us that support so that they can continue to maintain that support. And so when other states are going to their people and saying, we need money to send troops and people in law enforcement to another state to help, and they're overwhelmingly doing it, that's optimistic because it's really bringing to the attention to the rest of the country. This isn't a Texas problem. This is an American problem, and you know we're starting to see people come up. I just saw, as you were saying in Arizona, I saw a bunch of senators and congressmen down there, and they were raising red flags and screaming and hollering, going, wait, time out. And so hopefully it wasn't just a Codell show, but it appears they're starting to realize that flow getting pushed there is causing problems for them too. And so we're going to keep pushing, and you know we're going to get through it. This too shall pass, but it's just going to be a lot of hard work. But we're going to get it done, and I'm optimistic.
Thank you very much. I want to thank each one of you for everything you're doing for Texans and for Texas, and thanks for taking the time to come here today and share your experience and your expertise. Please help me thank our panelists.
Thank you.